Hello, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Anna Marie Andrews from Cielo, and I'll be helping to host today's session. We'll start by getting a few logistics out of the way and then straight into our content. If you have questions for today's presenters, Greg or Arko, please use the chat function through GoToWebinar. As it makes sense, we'll make time for those during the webinar, but we also have designated Q&A time at the end. We also have an interactive poll, so please engage with that during the session as we're really interested to capture your perspective. And finally, the presentation is being recorded, and we'll make both the recording and the webinar slides available to you tomorrow via email. With that, I will hand it over to Greg and Arko to introduce themselves and share a little bit about Cielo and Everest.
Thank you, Anna Marie. Good afternoon, Arko. Nice to see you. And thank you for those who have joined. My name is Greg Summers. I'm president of Cielo North America. For those of you who are less familiar with our organization, we are a leading global RPO organization who is tasked with helping to change the talent trajectory for organizations across a select group of sectors. I'll talk a little bit about that throughout our webinar today, but I appreciate you all joining, and I look forward to the discussion. Arko, would you introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Greg, and thanks, Anne-Marie, for inviting me over here. So I'm part of Everest Group. We are a global research organization focusing on the global services and enabling technology space. So I specifically lead our research for talent and HR services and technology, and been with Everest Group for almost 10 years now, and very, very closely tracked the talent acquisition, services, technology, and RPO industry. And great to be over here. So today, we'll talk about three important things. So broadly, we're trying to understand how RPO can help enterprise solve their talent challenges. So we'll start off with talking about what are the macro trends that are impacting the entire world, and also specifically the talent and talent acquisition industries, and how those macro trends have changed over time. Especially, how has COVID impacted that? What new elements it has brought in, and more specifically, the current and dynamic changes that are happening at this very moment. And then we'll move on to what has been the recruitment process outsourcing or RPO story so far, and how it has evolved, and how we now see the fourth generation of RPO emerge, which we are essentially calling RPO 4.0. And last but not the least, we'll discuss what are the key implications of RPO 4.0 for enterprises and buyer organizations, and how they can take advantage of this to solve their talent challenges. So as we talk about some of these macro trends, right? Some of these are old and some of these are new. So if I talk about some of the relatively older trends, trends which were already very evident in the pre-pandemic era, right? The first one is evolving customer expectations. So, customer or consumer expectations have radically changed in the last few years. People now expect companies to respond and interact in real time. And they expect consistency and continuity of brand perspective from various different channels. And they really expect that all those interactions to be easy and convenient, so they do not have to spend too much of time. And we have seen that companies who are really responding to all of these and changing their business models are being really successful. And very closely related to that is multiple options for service. One key among them is the self-serve option, along with contact center or chatbots, and that has really translated to some of the talent world as well. Today's talent really expects their interaction with their work, organizations with the same experience that they expect as consumers, right? So that's one very important trend. And second, I think we can't highlight it enough, is the technological innovation and disruption that is happening. Most importantly, the pace of acceleration has really gone up dramatically. as well as the scale of technology adoption is much more today than previously. So those were two of the sort of initial trends. Now, if we move to some of the other macro trends that are happening, if you can move to the next page. So the other things that were happening even before COVID were on the sort of geopolitical environment. We saw trade wars among major economies, protectionism, economic recession coming in, and all that has impacted how organizations do business. But in addition to that, we've also seen interesting workforce changes and new dynamics that have been brought in by COVID. So Greg, this is something that you experience on a daily basis. Would you like to elaborate?
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess the first thing I would say, Arko, is having been in this industry now for 25 years, it's remarkable to think that we're on the fourth evolution of this offering, and exciting because it feels to me like I've had the opportunity to participate in an industry that continues to evolve. And certainly from Cielo's perspective, we try to lead in that evolution. But just to your point about what's happening right now, it goes without saying that when you go through an experience that's once in 100 years, that you're going to see the impacts of that coming in places that you didn't expect. I think last year we recognized that just general logistics, and speaking to your point about business continuity planning, general logistics for everything from electronics to food to toilet paper was a real challenge last year. And many organizations were struggling to try and figure out how they could get products to market. As a result, some of that was reflected in the talent space, because most of the organizations, and I can speak about some of the consumer brands and retail organizations that we support, specifically in the consumer brand space, were seeing huge demand for their products, which caused them to have to shift lines to try and put more products out, but also required more resources to be able to support that demand, which was something that was unforeseen before the pandemic. So those things were a general impact on some of the clients that we saw. But what I would also say is we already saw the workforce mix that you have suggested here coming into play, and some of their influences coming into play with the Gen X and the millennial population. But when you couple that with the disruption in the way people work, giving them the option and the opportunity, and in fact, almost requirement to be working from different environments than their home office, than their work offices, it actually accelerated some of the requests and employee-related desires of that specific population, the Gen Z and the millennial population. It is very much a population that is purpose-driven, is looking for more flexibility than we've seen in other generations. And when you create an environment where they can work from home and still be as productive, you certainly see the convergence of employee desires and needs meeting with what organizations are bringing forward. And some of that also helps to support some of the business continuity planning that we saw organizations actually moving toward and really looking to try and solidify through the pandemic last year and in earnest here this year. I think you reflected here on some of the talent supply and demand gaps that were taking place. If I think about just this graph for a moment, and then I'll speak a little bit about what we saw with our clients and what we're seeing in some of the organizations that we support today. I think the graph in and of itself sort of speaks to the longer term trend. So of course, if you look at the end and you see what happened last year, there was a huge spike in unemployment. But actually, if you take a look at the longer term trend, starting back in 2009, we see that the unemployment numbers and the job openings numbers are on a 12-year trend to converge. And last year was a bit of a disruption, but very quickly, within a matter of a couple of months, it restored its trend to reach that point that almost feels like where we were in February of 2020, which was that for almost every skill from entry level, and that entry level speaks to administrative, some of the organizations that we work with that have administrative roles, have light industrial or warehousing roles. We work with other organizations in the retail space that have merchandising roles. We were seeing instances where organizations actually had candidates that had up to 8 to 10 potential opportunities in the entry-level space for the same types of roles that they were hiring for. That was in February of last year. We had, with the pandemic, a short pause on that. But here now in July of 2020, we're right back where we started. And when you take a look at what's happening in the tech sector in particular, unemployment for tech sector roles is 2.2%. That's half of what we're at right now in North America, which is trending to about 6% or 5.9% right now. 2.2% in the tech sector unemployment, clearly back to where we were with some of the challenges in hiring before the pandemic, and likely even more challenging as all organizations try to move toward a more tech-enabled offering in their own businesses as well. So just huge demand from tech to entry-level hiring, the skilled trade area, which is unfortunately, I think especially in the US, we're seeing a dearth of talent in the skilled trade areas at almost the worst possible time as manufacturing moves back to the US. We're seeing organizations have a strong demand for mechanics and technical roles, as well as CDL drivers. Almost every organization that's looking for that talent right now is trying to find ways to identify the next level of individuals that might come in the next 5 years or 10 years to help continue to support their business. So it is real. The supply gap is certainly real, and it's hitting every role in every organization and industry that we're seeing, and we're looking to try and find ways to ensure that our options and our solutions actually keep pace with it, so that they can tap into some of the markets that might not otherwise have been viewed for the type of talent that the clients that we support need.
Yeah, absolutely, Greg. And I think we were talking the other day that the hiring numbers have gone up so dramatically that now it's actually difficult to find recruiters, right? Talented recruiters are in massive demand. It's
Absolutely.
the ultimate irony, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's for sure. And I think something that speaks to just within the space of RPO in particular is one of the things, and I know we may talk about this in a little bit, it's one of the things that I know when I consider some of the conversations we had over the course of the last year, it's definitely one of those things that has become more evident for organizations that have moved to RPO as a reason why that solution or that selection was validated. Finding recruiters right now, frankly, even for organizations in our space, is a bit of a challenge. So much more so for direct employers.
Yeah, absolutely, Greg. And I think that's a good segue to the next section of our discussion today. How has RPO evolved, and how are we moving to the fourth generation of RPO? So now, if I talk about the first three generations of RPO, this is an industry that has really successfully evolved over the last 15 and 20 years. It has constantly changed itself to buyer requirements, and very importantly, gone through multiple sort of crisis situations and evolved through that, right? I mean, in the beginning, there was a lot of focus on cost, speed, efficiency, but RPO 3.0, which was just the pre-COVID era, we saw really increased focus on superior candidate experience. People were really talking about the quality of hire, and not just talking about quality of hire, but even better ways to measure it. Truly using analytics to measure it, rather than just depending on the hiring manager's word on how good the quality of the hire was. And it has evolved through the sort of last decade's recession, when RPO 2.0 came in, and then as digital started evolving, RPO 3.0 started encapsulating all those technology elements, as well as going much beyond vanilla sourcing and screening. So Greg, you are a veteran in the industry, right? So if you had to compare with maybe one of your oldest clients 20, 25 years back, and client today, what sort of differences do you see?
Yeah, Arko, I think you're calling me a dinosaur, not a veteran. I know what you're saying. Yeah, I appreciate it. As I say, I've very early on, at the age of 10, entered the RPO industry and have seen it evolve over the course of the last 20 years or so. And I can think about, especially as I joined this organization, some of our first clients, I can think about a large global financial services client that we supported. One of their biggest problem statements was that they had a large pool of candidates that they weren't able to make it through and screen appropriately, and just simply wanted to make sure that they were identifying among that pool of candidates the right candidates to right ones to bring forward to hire. And so if you think about that problem statement, it's rooted, and I would say from the beginning of time, rooted in trying to identify what that experience is like for candidates. So they were looking for a way to ensure that the black hole, so to speak, which was people applying but not hearing back from anyone, was resolved, because that impacted their brand and the candidate experience. And we were supporting them in that way. I can think about a large media organization based here in North America that we supported doing sourcing and screening for their technology talent, and they were looking for something very similar as well, but it was very focused in that area, and we were leveraging their systems as we moved through to 2.0 and 3.0. Moving into 2.0, we had organizations that actually wanted to leverage the CRM, which was relatively new then, and something that created an infusion of technology to help support some of that candidate engagement. And certainly we led the way with organizations to couple some of the work that they were doing through the CRM with some brand capability to ensure that the messages and engagement that people were seeing reflected the best of their brand and what they were looking for. And I know specifically in our life sciences portfolio that came along right in the 2.0 timeframe, we had a number of organizations that we supported in life sciences that specifically were looking for ways to engage R&D talent or other regulatory talent that sometimes takes 6 to 8 months to curate and to engage. And so the CRM was very much a big part of that, and branding was a big part of that as well. You alluded to quality of hire. Certainly we saw in some of the high volume clients that we worked with, finding ways to reflect on the quality of hire through attrition was a big part of what was happening in RPO 2.0 as well. And then, you know, I'd say more recently in the last 5 years in RPO 3.0, the focus has become, as you've indicated, very specifically on the candidate experience. You mentioned early on that consumer grade expectation that people have. And it's interesting, over the 25 years I've been in this space, that we've come from an environment where candidates frankly didn't expect to be heard from, or didn't expect to hear, I should say, from anyone that they applied to, because that was the norm in 2000, 2005, to a period right now where if they don't hear from you, that's a reflection on your brand. And so the big work we're doing with organizations today is ensuring that the work we do through various technologies and through our professional services capability and our brand practice reflects the ability to connect directly with candidates in real time, in some instances leveraging technology, and frankly, over the course of time for some of those organizations, candidates that might be in a market for a period of time. It's an absolute must as we've evolved to 3.0.
Yeah, absolutely, Greg. Great examples, but you know, beyond just the examples, actually, the hard numbers support the fact that RPO industry has really done well. So if we move to the next slide and look at some of the numbers, for the last 10 years, the RPO industry has almost consistently grown between 15 and 20%. That is a fantastic number, and in Everest Group we track a large number of outsourcing markets. So RPO has consistently ranked among the fastest growing outsourcing markets. Very high customer satisfaction throughout this time. And then if we come to last year, 2020, COVID was a huge shock. And being a sort of insider outsider in the industry, who's not part of the RPO industry but really looking at it, it was a pleasant experience to see that customer satisfaction really remained high. In fact, we saw greater customer satisfaction in 2020 than we saw in 2019, and more than half of the RPO buyers were extremely satisfied with their provider's COVID response, right? And And some of the numbers in 2020 itself, tell that story. While overall, understandably, the market shrunk by 12%, but the quarter-by-quarter story is much more interesting, right? By Q4, the industry had already moved into positive territory. More buyers were, starting to adopt RPO or coming back to the RPO model. And based on what we are hearing today, there's an absolute flood of requirements from enterprises, depending or are trying to rely on the RPO model to solve their talent acquisition problems. So, Greg, I wouldn't be surprised if your desk and inbox is filled with requests from potential clients.
It absolutely is, and I think that last year was a watershed moment for the RPO industry. It really was. I think 10 years from now, we're going to be looking back at this as that moment where this solution, this model was solidified in the minds of the HR community, the talent acquisition community, and quite frankly, the business community as a way to ensure that their organizations can have the business continuity that's really needed to drive the growth of their business. And the reason why I say that is because you're absolutely right. When you take a look at what was taking place in Q2 and Q3 of last year, the entire industry was down from a hiring perspective. But what we saw with our client base was it gave us an opportunity to actually engage with our clients in a completely different way than we were supporting them before. So we hosted a number of events with our client advisory board, with our broader client base to help them through the process of identifying how to engage with existing candidates that were looking at jobs that might have been stalled in process as a result of maybe having to cancel roles. We helped with some communication and engagement with existing employees, and also with branding for organizations that were, quite frankly, having to respond to not just the pandemic, but some of the social unrest that was taking place. Obviously, the George Floyd murder was here in North America was something that organizations were addressing, and everything related to DEI and B. So there were a number of different ways that we were engaged in helping to support our clients that simply went beyond just making a hire, that actually helped to reflect on the expertise and the capability that we could actually bring to our clients. And we saw our satisfaction levels increase year over year from 19 to 20 as well. To your point about the volume increase that we're seeing, much to our surprise in the end of Q3 of last year and coming into Q4, a significant increase in business. And I was just asked that most organizations that are trying to build back themselves right now are just are patient, because we are all trying to respond, and that's not just Cielo, but certainly our peers in the market, I'm sure, are also trying to address the needs of organizations that are now looking at this as not just the flexible model that was in place in RPO 1.0, but also the nimble model that can scale and flex. And in some of the instances that we have with one of our life sciences clients, they went from not hiring anything in June, no open requisitions, to 1,800 roles in a matter of 45 days. And so being able to flex up to support that is significant, and not something that organizations are really equipped to do internally, which is the reason why, again, I say I think this is a watershed moment for organizations as they're looking to build back efficiently and quickly.
Yeah, absolutely, Greg. I think the examples that you gave ties in very nicely with what we see is the key value propositions for RPO 4.0. You talked about the extreme scalability and flexibility and the risk part of it. We've already talked about the superior stakeholder experience that is becoming important here, not just for candidates, but also for hiring managers. But a couple of other things that we see is, cost is still important today, right? That part has not gone away. And with new technologies and digital coming in, there is an opportunity to gain exponential efficiencies across the board. And then, as we talk about the talent demand supply gap, talent acquisition today is having more and more of a direct correlation with business outcomes. You can't really hire the right people on time, your entire business gets impacted. And that is where we see RPO playing a bigger role in terms of impacting the business outcomes. And last, but very interesting topic, this can also be the gateway to total talent management, and not just thinking about your permanent hires, but looking at your entire talent set. Any interesting examples over here, Greg?
Yeah, I'll give a few, but I'll certainly keep it brief. If I think about the next frontier, which is having clear active contribution to business outcomes, what we're seeing, and most of this sits in the space of business services, our business services clients, our retail clients that we support, in some of the consumer brands clients that I mentioned earlier as well too, and our healthcare organizations that we support, certainly are in situations where lack of resources, which is really an acute issue for many of those industries right now. Lack of resources means that they need to either offer additional opportunities for overtime for their existing staff, or simply go without products on shelf or products moving out of warehouses, or care to people who are coming into their facilities. And those are all real examples that we are seeing if organizations that we support aren't getting the resources they need. And frankly, I was thinking about a Wall Street Journal article that came out a couple weeks ago, which dubbed this period the Great Resignation, which is an interesting thing. I don't know if you saw that one, but the essence of the article was just reflecting on the fact that people are leaving their jobs without having another job. And it seems counterintuitive, but that's what's happening. And so I share that only to say business outcomes are tied to the ability to not just hire people, but retain the people that you currently have. And if you have to work them in overtime, many of them may not want to do that after what's been a very difficult year. So I just share that as an example of what we're looking at with organizations to tie some of our outcomes to ensure that they've got resources where they need it. And certainly that ties into total talent. We may talk a little bit more about that later, but making sure that people are opening the aperture to look at different ways they can hire talent, not just full-time talent, but other streams of talent to ensure that they can achieve their business outcomes. I think those two, number 3 and 5, are probably tied together.
Yeah, really interesting examples, Greg, and I love the term Great Resignation. That's something that will stick in my mind. But moving on, while we have talked about the value propositions over here, what are those levers which will ultimately enable and empower RPO 4.0? So we have identified 5 of these, and we are calling it the 5D approach. So 4 of these, the blue ones that you see over here, were levers that have been there for some time, but we really see an accelerated importance of these, and to some extent change in how they are being used, right? For example, domain centricity. An RPO provider really needs to have that process and technology based domain expertise. That was probably a case for quite some time, but what we increasingly see is industry and job role specific nuances increase, and that's an important part of domain centricity. Data and digital, of course, extremely important, and we delve deeper into this in the following slides. And as we talk about resignation and people not sort of wanting to remain, the entire experience-led design becomes critical. Greg, you touched upon how diversity, equity, and inclusion has become very important. And then sort of the last bit is a new lever that got introduced with COVID-19, which is distributed and dispersed talent. In some ways, we see this as a challenge, but in some ways, it's also an opportunity to take advantage of. So in the next few slides, we'll get into the details of this. But before that, a poll for all of our people over here. So when you think of all these 5 elements of the 5D elements of RPO 4.0, which are the most important to you from a talent acquisition perspective in the next 6 to 18 months? And you can select the top 2 which are most important.
I see, Arco, we do not get an opportunity to vote, but I may still share my opinion once we get through with the poll.
So Greg, let me test you. What do you think will be the top 2? Let's see who's better.
All right, I'll tell you my first two. I think I believe that diversity, equity, and inclusion will be among the top ones. It has been both refreshing, rewarding, and pretty intriguing to see that over the last year or so, this has become a critical concern for so many organizations. So I expect to see that there. I actually expect to see potentially data and digital as the number.
I agree on. Yeah, I completely agree on data and digital. But number two, I'm expecting experience-led design. So let's see.
Are we?
Greg, you have won the battle. Data and digital, D&I are the top two. Congratulations, Greg.
I'm all right. Well, Arko, the next time I see you, you owe me lunch.
Absolutely.
You owe me lunch on that. Well, look, I would say every single one of these things is critically important, and I don't think you put a good talent acquisition program together without giving the requisite amount of time to each of these things to make sure that you're doing it well. And certainly from an RPO perspective, every single one of these things is what we are incorporating within the solutions that we provide to the clients. And I know we'll talk a little bit more about them, so I guess I'll save any commentary for later, but I think there's certainly no less significant one among this group.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we delve deeper into some of these experiential design elements is as we talked about, very important. I think it was number 3 on the poll. So we already talked about candidate experience in RPO 3.0. What has changed since then is experience now is important for all stakeholders involved, including the hiring managers and everyone associated with the talent acquisition process. And the second part is, within experience, we expect much more leverage of technology to provide that hyper personalized experience in recruitment. It's still a relatively new concept. It essentially means the personalization that we see in an Amazon actually coming to the recruitment world as well. Still a journey. We're not there yet, but we definitely expect that to happen. And the second part of that is some of the design thinking to eliminate unnecessary touch points. Today, with technology coming in, there's an opportunity to re-engineer some of the processes and probably leave aside or remove some of the processes which are not necessary anymore in a digital world. Greg, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I just briefly, experience is everything. Right now, experience is everything. You mentioned Amazon. We certainly have a number of our clients that competing in that same space are equally capable or more so able to bring forward a consumer experience that actually is driving everyone's experience across all of the other things that they engage in. And so we have to be mindful of everybody we would interact with, including our own recruitment teams, to ensure that their experience through the process is effective and efficient and personalized. To your earlier point, one thing that I think that might some of our attendees might be interested to know is even in our executive search practice, which is known to be an industry that is heavily resource intensive and white glove or hands-on, what we're finding is clients actually want information in a more simple way, something they can access on their own. They want to understand how their job is flowing through process, where the candidates are, what's happening with them, who's bubbling to the top, when have we last talked to them. And so our global executive search practice has already deployed a technology that allows us to engage differently with our clients in a way that's bespoke to them. They can actually engage and don't necessarily always need to pick up the phone to talk to someone live through some of the details that matter on a search that is critical to their business. And this is something that I'd say even 5 years ago, most people wouldn't have expected could be done. It's something we're doing now because we know it reflects what the market demands and is asking for, and we're able to provide to them. And it doesn't sacrifice any of the expertise we've got and our ability to deliver successfully on those searches.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the key elements to deliver that superior experience is actually technology, right?
Yes.
So as we move to the next element, which is the data and digital, the next lever that we are talking about. So if you move to the next slide. I think everyone here agrees that technology and data and digital is one of the top levers. But what is interesting is how that lever is being applied. That has changed dramatically probably in the last 12 to 18 months, right? So the entire philosophy is slowly changing. Earlier, we had this philosophy of technology-enabled services, which ultimately meant the solution is a services solution. We try to put in bits and pieces of technology here and there to sort of improve the efficiency, improve the experience. That has now shifted, where we are now calling it services-enabled technology solution, where the core is technology, but of course it has all the flexibility to accommodate human intervention as and where required. So both are combinations of human touch and technology, but there's a subtle shift in how we are applying and which is the core over here. And very closely related to that is what sort of tools and technologies we are using. I mean, all of us know that there are great startups, a large number of tools in the HR and talent space, right? I was just reading an article yesterday that unicorns are getting created in the HR talent space at a faster rate than ever before.
Yeah.
Every new valuation that's happening, it's over $1 billion. So, and many of these are really, really great tools. But with so many tools, how do you really bring them all together? How do you really take advantage of it? 15, 20 different tools, if they're not speaking to each other, doesn't really add that value. So creating that integrated ecosystem out of all these tools becomes extremely critical. Otherwise, it's still bits and pieces, and you are not able to leverage the full value that technology can offer you. So integrated system essentially brings in seamless flow of data, much better analytics than you can do with discrete pieces of data, multi-device access, and single user login, ultimately all contributing to greater experience. So Greg, Cielo has been one of the pioneers in terms of introducing technology and in fact this integrated ecosystem within the RPO space. So what has been your experience?
Yeah, well, so first, I actually have been following the technology space for the last several years, and one of the things I would say is there are a lot of unicorns, but there certainly are a lot of organizations that are just frankly horses, right? So I think that's the one thing most organizations on the buyer side should recognize. It's very costly to get involved in identifying point solutions and trying to find ones that are fit for purpose for an organization, which is one of the reasons why we've led in technology as it relates to the RPO industry. We've been able to identify the ones that truly are difference makers and incorporate them into an integrated process flow. I was thinking about some of the clients that we've evolved with over the course of the last couple of years. One of the financial services firms that we work with, we hire several thousand claims administrators, sales and customer service resources for them. And we have a team that right now is about a third of what it would be if we had designed it 5 years ago. And it's simply because we've been able to leverage some of the technology that we've been talking about for several years and finally are putting into play, right? The conversational AI, some of the electronic onboarding, some of the other tools that we're using there allow us to leverage less resources to get the work done, but actually apply them in places that matter. There to be able to answer and direct questions for people who have it, and not simply to be managing administrative tasks that we can leverage technology to do, or other tasks that humans don't do as well. So I think there's been an adoption of our client base and a recognition from our client base of that, and something that we're deploying both for ease of use and also for effectiveness in the process.
Yeah, absolutely, Greg. And then if you move to the next lever about domain centricity. So we talked about 3 types of domain, right? The first is the process-centric domain. Of course, the sourcing and screening is important, but in today's world, the RPO provider really needs to be flexible because every client situation is becoming more unique and more different than others. So an RPO provider who's able to bring that, and I would call it problem-solving mindset or consultative or advisory mindset, that becomes very important beyond just, vanilla execution of processes. We just talked about, technology. Greg, you're right. An RPO provider needs to have that technology domain understanding of all the tools out there in the market and the capability to bring that all together, which is something, honestly, enterprises are struggling. I mean, an enterprise can't really spend time looking at, 1,000 tools out there and selecting the best. And that is where the RPO provider comes in. But the one that's very interesting to me is the industry and job family-oriented domain expertise, right? As technology becomes more important, every industry has its own nuances. Fintech is very different from technology in healthcare. The requirements, a recruiter who's say working in the life sciences industry needs to have very different skills than a recruiter who's working in the technology industry. They really need to understand that, and that is where we feel that verticalized domain expertise has become very important. And to me, probably the industry that shows it the most is the healthcare and life sciences. Greg, that is one industry that you have looked at a lot. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think on the surface, they appear to be industries that overlap, and they certainly do. But to your earlier point, if we're looking at clinical roles in one space versus the other, they're actually different. The motivations of the employees or the potential employees that we're attracting in the healthcare space versus the life sciences space is different. The people who engage with them, our recruiters, have to have different skills and expertise. And one of the things that we're doing to ensure that we're building the framework of solutions that are that fit or match the industries, and to your earlier point, not just the industries, but the job families within those industries that we support, is ensuring that the whole process, front to back, from even our implementation process, all the way through to day-to-day engagement and what we do with our clients 3 to 5 years down the road, is reflecting the fact that there are differences within these industries that we have to support, even if some of the jobs they hire appear to be the same. And we know that from the years of experience in those two industries in particular. And so that's our design thinking to ensure that the solution we put in place reflects it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Perfect examples. And then if we move to the sort of last two levers, diversity, equity, inclusion, that was number 2 in our poll. So Greg, what sort of requests are you seeing from clients, and what are you doing to solve that?
Yeah, I guess I'll go back to what I said earlier, which is this is one thing for me personally. I'm really just pleased to see has continued to be a point of focus for organizations, because it isn't as if last year was the first time this was a concern for organizations. We've been working with organizations since our inception 16 years ago to help them with their strategy to find and identify underrepresented talent. So this is something that's been a core part of our offering and what we focus on. What I'm very pleased to see now is it's so pervasive. Everyone's focused on it right now, and everyone's looking at ways, because they recognize it's not just a social imperative, but it's a business imperative to try and identify additional talent. And so within our organization, we've got both a specifically dedicated DEI practice and set of consultants, as well as brand practice that heavily supports the work we're doing here. We've done DEI assessments. It's a 21-point assessment across our portfolio of clients to help them just identify what candidates are looking for, how they compare against other organizations in their industry, and doing some social listening. What are people actually saying about their brand as it relates to DEIB? And last year actually gave us a really good opportunity to have organizations actually reflect what their point of view was and see what the response from candidates and from their employees were. So I think that's was unique, but we're carrying it forward, because what we recognize is it wasn't just a point in time need. Organizations actually need to put the frameworks together to ensure that they're actually finding talent and retaining talent for the long haul. And that's really where we're converting those assessments into action with our solutions for the clients and prospects that we work with today.
Yeah, absolutely. And in a way that's closely related to the last lever, which is distributed and dispersed talent. So while on one hand, it's sort of a challenge because people are moving away from those traditional talent hubs. So as an organization, you might need to relook at your location strategy. But at the same time, it opens up the world to a much more bigger and better source of talent, right? You just don't need talent to be located at your locations anymore. And it also opens up the chance to really make your organization diverse, right? As the requirement is not focused on a few big cities or a few big centers, that's the perfect opportunity to ensure that you're really getting the best talent from everywhere and really diverse talent from everywhere.
Yeah, I would tell you, I think what's interesting is ours has been an industry, and Cielo specifically, that's been distributed and dispersed for quite a long time. Most of the work we do is remote from our clients, and even those organizations that previously didn't actually probably desired to have us closer to on-site or near-site recognized last year that our ability to actually continue, speaking to your point of business continuity, we didn't miss a beat with our clients that were still active in hiring mode last spring when they had to shut down and move away from facilities because a good portion of our employee base was already remote, and we were able to deploy resources to keep them up and active and support them, obviously, from a personal perspective. But it actually spoke to some of the other value drivers we're talking about with RPO, the ability to actually support clients. But from a client side perspective, we saw a lot of our healthcare organizations and some of our technology organizations that previously were truly focused on having talent in certain geographies because maybe in a healthcare space they had regulatory constraints, but in the technology space it was more a preference. They actually broke out of those norms, and it gave us a chance to have a different conversation with them about finding tech talent in Utah, finding tech talent outside of California, but potentially in Oregon, potentially in Texas. And so that gave them the ability to really open the aperture and find more talent, and specifically to your earlier point, underrepresented talent that may potentially not have been in some of the markets where their corporate locations or offices are.
Yeah, great points, Greg. So now, that we've talked about what are those key driving levers, driving forces beyond for the next generation of RPO. So what are the implications? What does it mean for enterprise buyers? And also what does it mean for RPO providers? So the first implication that we see is that the RPO is poised for accelerated adoption. So based on the current trends and based on our read of the market, we expect the RPO market to really grow at a fast clip going ahead, and more adoption even from newer industries, right? Industries such as financial services, healthcare, manufacturing, some part of technology have always or been traditional adopters of RPO, but now we see new industries really opening up to the model and finding success. One important sector is the government or public sector. In UK or Australia, they have always adopted RPO, but in US, we saw them opening up to the RPO model in terms of hiring people for contact tracing for COVID, and that really worked out well. So we expect the government and public sector to be adopting more RPO. Fast growth technology companies, startup type companies, they really need to scale up fast, and it's very difficult for them to do it on their own. And they are turning to RPO providers to help them in their growth journey. Online and traditional retail, these have not been big adopters of RPO in the past. And some of that was to do with cost. But today, RPO with the leverage of technology has become so efficient that retail can now adopt RPO. In fact, we have seen a large number of examples in the last 12 to 18 months, both online and traditional, who have adopted RPO because of the heavy technology intervention over here. And lastly, advanced or high-tech manufacturing, starting to adopt RPO more. But that is just one part of the story. Who is going to adopt RPO? The other part of the story is even within traditional adopters, even within people who have adopted RPO earlier, 3, 4, 5 years back, 10 years back, we expect that the nature of engagement that they have with service providers will change, and they're asking for more and more, strategic services. That's a nice buzzword to use, strategic services. But Greg, can you describe what are these strategic services? What are these new gen services that your clients are asking you?
Yeah, a couple quick examples. I recognize we're maybe short on time. Certainly workforce planning, helping organizations identify the full pool of candidates that they might have. It's something people have talked about. We're actually seeing it come to fruition right now. We talked about DEIB beyond just the sourcing, but also the planning and the facilitation around ensuring organizations are prepared to receive underrepresented populations within their organization. Those are certainly key elements to what we're doing. And all of it's embedded within the analytics. And we haven't spoken a lot about that right now, but the strategic services that we're being asked for are underpinned by being able to aggregate data and information in an effective way for organizations to make decisions about actually where to hire people and what skills they might need and what skills they might want to develop.
Yeah, perfect. And then if you move to the second key implication, we talked about technology being a lever, but the key change is, the approach is now a platform-based approach. So we talked about the integrated ecosystem. So RPO providers are today trying to bring in all those tools out there in the market, and to the end client, they're offering it as a platform. Whether it's the candidates or hiring managers or recruiters, they are not really interacting with 10, 15, 20 different tools on their side, but sort of one platform. However, this is much easier said than done. So Greg, Cielo has done a lot of this. So what were some of the challenges, and how did you start with this, and where are you in this journey on the platform approach?
Yeah, we've been on this journey for a long time, Arco, and I think much as RPO is moving to 4.0, Cielo, from an organizational perspective as it relates to technology, is evolving to another level as well. I truly believe that organizations will look to as a necessity, move to RPOs to look to them to bring technology along for it. There's just too much coming forward in the marketplace right now for organizations to be able to understand exactly how to leverage them to their benefit. And I'm not convinced they'll be able to successfully put a business plan together that will get the funding they need to do it anyway. So they need to look to RPO providers. And we're leading in this space with our own significant investment in a core platform that allow us to go beyond just the basics, but it certainly has the workforce configuration and workflow management, scheduling, which can be complex, certainly labor analytics, DEI capabilities, job description optimizers, onboarding tools, employee experience tools. I mean, there's just so much out there. And so our ability to actually integrate that within our own platform and offer it in a simple integration or a simple engagement with a client that wants to turn it all over is a critical differentiator and a necessity for organizations in this space. So I expect that this is probably going to be the most important evolution of what takes place in RPO 4.0.
Yeah, great points, Greg. And then as we move to the sort of last implication, all of these, strategic services, technology that we are talking about, also involves higher cost from the enterprises side, right? But the benefits are also much greater, and not all of that can be, measured through direct dollar benefits. So as you are working with some of your clients, how do you see them build the business case? How are they moving beyond the, simple dollar benefit part of the business case?
Well, today, just a couple quick examples. Today, organizations are looking at, going back to my point about individuals leaving, not having enough resources in place, impact to sales, impact to inventory delivery and execution. When you're looking at DEIB, impact of organizations not having a diverse pool of people designing strategies, fit for and reflective of their customer base. These are all things that have an impact on business outcome, that are things we're tying our solutions and certainly tying our results to as it relates to how we engage with organizations. But that's how buyers actually find a way to reflect the benefit of RPO to their end constituency and to their executive stakeholders.
Yeah, so that was in terms of the key implications. We'll finally end with what are the considerations for talent acquisition practitioners. So Greg, what would be your advice to our attendees over here?
Well, I guess very simply, this is in my 25 years in this space, it is a moment where it feels like it is becoming much more sophisticated, much more complex, even for those practitioners on our side in the RPO space. So with so much to learn and so much to do, I would suggest these things that are indicated right here, with a heavy emphasis on experience and technology, are the key things for people to look at and to understand how to bring that forward to best support their organization.
Yeah, and on that note, the criteria for provider selection also needs to change, right? The traditional RFPs won't work over here. You need to look beyond or under the hood to see the strategic orientation, the culture, and what do they have beyond the simple. So with that, I think we can open for Q&A.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Arko and Greg, for the active conversation. We did have a question come through in relation to the last theme that we talked about, technology taking center stage. When we look at the amount of investment going into the HR technology space, this attendee wanted to know what happens to an organization's existing tool and technology investment when they decide to leverage or partner with an RPO provider and their technology ecosystem.
Arko, if you don't mind, I'll take this quickly. Would love your perspective from a broader market perspective. What you'll find is sometimes it's easiest to run out the tools or identify additional tools that an RPO partner can bring forward as those contracts end. Certainly, there's an opportunity to integrate and leverage the spend that's already been committed within a solution itself. I think that's our general bias, is to make sure that we do not leave any dollar unused or unleveraged with clients that have already committed to certain technology to support processes, and work with them over time to make sure they're optimal and the best ones that they would want to use.
Yeah, and to add on to that, when we talked about the platform-based approach, it's not a rigid platform that we are talking about. We're talking about a very modular and plug-and-play platform. So it's not one fixed platform that is just you go to a client and sort of install it over there. It depends on the situation. It changes on the situation, which tools are included and which are not.
Mm-hmm. Another question that's come in, this attendee is asking, as businesses continue to face a lot of uncertainty, does it make sense to have a long-term workforce strategy anymore? And if so, what are the steps that they should be taking? And what role, if any, does an RPO provider play?
Greg, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Very simply, Emery, I would say it always makes sense to have a long-term strategy. I haven't been in this space a long time. I think I've been through 3 recessions, a global pandemic, and about 2 or 3 job booms, and none of those were really predicted. So I think you always have to have a long-term strategy. I think it starts first with identifying what those critical roles are that drive your business, and ensuring that your strategy, your solution, and the experience you're designing for those roles match what you're trying to achieve, and then you build out from there.
Yeah, and to add on to that, the two important things, 2 sort of starting points are, one is analytics. You really need to have good data. Other than that, you can't do workforce planning. And the second is you probably need to look at both talent and talent alternatives. So not just permanent talent, but all types of talent that you have in the organization. And also going forward, which of these will be automated, and sort of move in that direction.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you to everyone that joined us for today's webinar. As we close out, just a reminder of 2 resources that you'll be receiving along with the webinar recording and the slides. The full reports created by Everest in partnership with Cielo, RPO 4.0, and we've talked a lot about technology and the role that it plays in a compelling TA strategy, a white paper that looks at different TA technology models and how to assess and select the one that is right for your organization. So thank you to everyone that's joined us today. A huge thank you to you, Arko and Greg, for the active conversation. I hope everyone has a good rest of their day.
Thank you.
Thank you.